All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I'm the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and the brand new Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terrorism. And I've recorded more than 5,500 interviews since 2003, almost all on foreign policy, and all available for you at scotthorton.org. You can sign up for the podcast feed there, and the full interview archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. Well, look, everybody, on the line, I got Danial McAdams again. Of course, you know him as the co-host of the Liberty Report with Ron Paul and as the director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and, of course, was foreign policy advisor to the congressman back when he was a congressman. And but especially they do that great show every day, the Liberty Report. Welcome back. How you doing, Dan?
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me back on your program.
Very happy to have you here, and happy to share these interests in common with you. Like most people don't know, don't care, ain't interested, but you and I seem to incidentally and coincidentally agree that it's an interesting story that the United States officially lifted their ban on arming the Azov Battalion at war in Ukraine. What's the Azov Battalion, Danial McAdams?
Well, as my great friend Scott Horton has called them many times, very appropriately, a bunch of Hitler-loving Nazis. Essentially, that's the case. I mean, they try to deny it, but every time there's a photo of them, there'll be a tattoo slip or a patch on their uniform slip that will like harken back to the SS. So I think it only shows the desperation that they're running out of people to arm. All these 60-year-old dudes out there are not doing that well, and so they are just desperate, to give arms to new people.
Yeah. Now I must have skipped a beat because I thought that they had already lifted this ban back a few years ago. I, of course, remember when John Conyers got it passed in the first place. Maybe at some point they had begun trying to implement it again, and I had just missed that part.
Yeah, I think what happened, I forget that exact part, but I think it was the Leahy Amendment as well forbade them from doing it because they had human rights abuses in their record. But what the State Department said is that we thoroughly vetted them now and they're just A-OK, so stop worrying about it so much. And so that's lifted. I don't know how strong they are. They have a new, I don't have it in front of me, but they have a new, they're no longer called the Azov Battalion. They have a new, more military sounding name like the 79th, whatever, this and that and the other. But essentially it's the same people with the same origins.
Yeah. Well, I know at least part of it is the 3rd Separate Infantry Division, they call it. I don't know if there are more. I think there are more in different names for them too. So I'm not sure how large they had grown. But, it's funny because people will say, yeah, it's true that maybe some Nazis helped found the thing a long time ago. But no, that guy Andrei Beletsky's still in charge of the deal as of, early this year when they were losing Avdiivka, or however you pronounce that town. They had fought in Bakhmut and at Avdiivka, and he was there in charge of their retreat. And he was the guy and you should read the whole quote, man. I got the whole quote in the book. You got to get it off the Wayback Machine. But, they always say the famous quote about him saying, we got to lead the white race in the great crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen. That whole thing it's incredible. It's like as a specimen of a ridiculous Nazi rant about the way things ought to be or something, like you could frame it. It's amazingly like on the nose crazy.
What's incredible about it is, you've got these student protests that have gone on. Now it's summer, so I don't know what they're doing against what's happening in Gaza. And, maybe a slip of the tongue or something else. And you had every member rushing down to the floor talking about how these were neo-Nazis. They were a bunch of crazy anti-Semites, and this and that. And there probably were some bad apples in there. But nevertheless, the speed with which the U.S. Congress moved against these people was remarkable. And on the other hand, as you say, you've got these Azov guys who have these long quotes about the white race and we got to get rid of the Semites. And nobody blinks an eye. I don't get, you and I, the hypocrisy has been a running theme in the work that we do constantly, but it's still, I am sometimes amazed, and I'm amazed in this situation.
Yeah, seriously. All right. So now on to this enemies list here. We were all on the proper not list back during the Russiagate scam with that loser from the Washington Post. And the whole thing, it was later revealed, was run by that scumbag Michael Weiss from the Atlantic Council. It was Yves Engler at the Naked Capitalist found his metadata, and someone else, I forget the other source, but there's a second source who went through the metadata and proved that it was Michael Weiss who was behind the proper not thing. And antiwar.com was on there, and I'm pretty sure you guys were on there as well.
Yeah, we were,
But me and I think some of the guys were feeling kind of bad that we'd been excluded from a couple of the enemies lists. Like, hey, we're doing really good work over here. But so we deserve the credit. And so here we've gotten some. We've been added to this list, the Libertarian Institute, the antiwar.com, and of course the Ron Paul Institute as well, with a lot of good and some bad company, have been put on. It's not exactly an enemies list, but sort of, kind of. I think maybe they're giving us credit for preventing the Congress from forking over all the tax money here. But so why don't you tell us about your impression of this thing? And first of all, what is the name of it again?
It's the Data Journalism Agency. TXT is the short form of the organization. And it's a Ukrainian NGO, another one of those NGOs, of course, that all have their their snouts deep into the U.S. government for funding. But they released this report, roller coaster from Trumpists to communists, the forces in the U.S. impeding aid to Ukraine and how they do it, is the report. And it's fascinating. I agree with you. I like being on these lists. And thankfully, we haven't been put on the kill list yet, although I did give a speech once where I said I feel like a slacker that I haven't.
You can go ahead and leave me and the guys off the kill list. Thank you. Jeez.
Yeah. It's, again, can you imagine if Russia had such a list of, kill list and this and that? But it made I've had a lot of mixed thoughts about this, Scott, to be honest with you. And my first reaction was gut 'em, because I was digging, doing all kinds of stuff that I used to do when I was younger and had more energy. And I found, several ties to the U.S. government, USAID, and the State Department. And my first thought, got them. This is it. This is going to embarrass them. This is going to really, because you can't get too loud about this stuff, But then I've had some mixed thoughts afterward, because the thing is so over the top. The list is so over the top. It's so beyond the left and right. It's not. It's got a lot of friends of ours like Max Blumenthal. And others on the left. But something about it seems strange to me, because if you notice what happened afterward, several members, and to their credit, that's fine. They came down and said, we need to find out what is going on with this list. There are, Donald Trump is on the list. Matt Gaetz is on the list. Rand Paul is on this. What is going on? And maybe it's a conspiratorial side of me, but it seems to me almost like a limited hangout. Like, yeah, we're going to get this bad apple, but that's going to save the village, to mix my metaphors. You know what I mean? Maybe that's crazy, but like, if you can find a really bad actor, then you can say, see, we have cleaned out the stables. Now it's clear to give them more money. Yeah. And I could be wrong. It's just a feeling I have.
It could be. It did seem a bit lazy for whoever put it together. Clearly they got a big part of their information was just who showed up at our great anti-war rally in Washington, which is good. I was really proud to see the Libertarian Party up there, as the center of a thing. And believe me, I don't take offense, but it goes to show kind of what they don't quite understand, where they have me and the Institute right there directly adjacent to Dr. Paul. Thank you very much. I do that thing here where I breathe on my fingernails and shine them on my shirt. But they got me all the way across the street from antiwar.com. But I'm the editorial director of antiwar.com, dude, and I've kind of been associated with them for 20 years. So you might think that they would have had that kind of in there, but no. They had me on the other side of Ron Paul from antiwar.com, I think, in fact.
Wow, the conspiracy is deeper than we think.
Yeah, or
but that's a good point about the rally that we had. And you're right. Kudos to LP. It's one of the best things they've done is holding this Rage Against the War Machine rally. But I hadn't thought about it until you just mentioned it. Yes, that is one sort of vein that went through the report. But I guess that shows you how freaked out they were by that, which is a good sign. Right. Here we are, like working every day, writing articles and giving interviews and doing talks. But this thing seemed to have really freaked them out. And even though, let's be honest, it wasn't a massive turnout, but that just goes to show the power of these kinds of demonstrations, I think.
Yep. Well, and also, of course, that one was the libertarians and the left.
Yeah.
And as you can see from the graphical representation there, and this is, I think, could and should be a deliberate strategy of the libertarian movement and the Libertarian Party, that because we are so cool and so good on everything, that gives us plenty of overlap to get along with the left and the right, even if they could never get along with each other. That we could still get along and pal around with a bunch of David Swansons all day long and do an anti-war thing, and then turn right around and pal around with a bunch of pro-Trump America First types, because, we all have that soft spot for the paleos anyway. That whole America First thing anyway, they're all like our cousins in a sense. So we do have the ability, and we could and should exploit that more and more. And you can see that was what they were afraid of. They're like, well, look at all these libertarians and leftists all hanging out together. And then you have all these right-wing groups are right there adjacent too, all the Trump people. And we're sharing a lot of the same Mearsheimer quotes or whatever it is that we have in common here that got them so upset. And that's essentially what it is. Non-intervention here. We want to cut off Ukraine. We don't want to risk war with Russia over the Donbass. Are you crazy? I bet there are some states in the union where not a single person is willing to say they support that,
Yeah, or can't even find it. Even people in Washington. Where is the Donbass? Here's your test for the day before you vote senator or whatever your name is.
Seriously.
But at the risk of sounding a little bit arrogant, and I hope we don't. But in addition, as you make a very good point, for us sort of being a bridge between the so-called left and right, we can also hopefully teach each of them a little bit of something that they don't quite get on board. On the populist right, you'd have, we don't want to fund Ukraine anymore because we got to take out the Chi-Coms. And if we could just try to show them that there's a more consistent position that you can have that really is pro-America. And the same is true with the left. And I've worked with the left a lot, and I enjoy working with them. But there are some of them that want to bring everything but the kitchen sink in, and that doesn't belong in an anti-war protest. Okay, climate, whatever, got it. Take it to another protest. We don't want to deal with that, in this one. So hopefully, us being in the middle, we can kind of chill the other two guys out a little bit.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I think at our Rage Against the War Machine protest there wasn't too much of that. Somebody might have mentioned a little bit of global warming in there, but it was not like, oh, now the communists turn this into a free Mumia rally or whatever.
Yeah.
Like everybody was pretty much on topic,
They were definitely on topic. Yeah, it was great. And it was amazing hanging out around in the green room and just seeing people that are like, whoa. I'm sitting here, I've got, Ron Paul, Tulsi Gabbard, Dennis Kucinich, everyone's having the conversation. And I'm just sitting here, a fly on the wall. It was pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it was really cool. I changed my pants in front of Tulsi Gabbard.
Whoa. True confessions.
I don't think she was paying attention. Anyway, no, that was the best of times for sure. And then, and I'm sure I actually didn't look that closely, but on their charts and their graphical representations, they make sure to include some unsavory, American, I don't know, probably actual communists and actual fascists, so they can try to smear us with them. But I don't think that's going to stick very well. This is too mainstream of an opinion.
Yeah, I think so. I don't think it's enough. But I do wonder why they would include so many members and senators on it, because that's just, even members and senators that disagree, you're on some pretty sketchy ground if you start doing that, because the one thing that they value more than anything is their exalted position in the U.S. Congress. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can imagine members saying, hey, I don't agree with you on Ukraine, Matt Gaetz, but man, we shouldn't have these foreign organizations putting you on lists.
Right. Yeah, I saw that where he's even reacted, right, and said, well, I'm going to defund you then.
Yeah.
Right? They swung at the king and missed. And so now he's angry, and I guess we'll see what happens with that. I guess, you had your theory there. I guess, one explanation would be that they're just trying to escalate the thing. There's like an act of desperation, basically. I guess maybe that's what you were saying. They're trying to cause a fight in the Congress about this and get their enemies in the Congress into a fight that they'll lose so that then they can move forward after that. Was that basically what you're saying?
Well, not exactly. I mean, I think if you can give the impression that here is, I mean, of course, this is conspiracy stuff, but if you can give, and I've worked in a lot.
It's just politics, man.
Yeah. I mean, I've worked in NGOs overseas before, and some that were funded by the governments. But if you can get all of the suspicion, like put in this texty group, and then you can defund it. I mean, I would bet good money. I would bet good money that there are probably 100 Ukrainian NGOs that get funding from the U.S. government to do similar things, but less ostentatious, or less audacious, I mean, is the word I'm looking for. Sorry. And if you can wipe out this bad apple, then, hey, we got rid of this, and all the other 99 are still doing their evil deeds.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Hang on just 1 second for me here. You guys, I'm so proud to announce the publication of the Libertarian Institute's 14th book. It's Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War, Undue Influence, Deceptions, and the Neocon Energy Agenda by Gary Vogler, former senior oil consultant and deputy senior oil advisor for U.S. forces during Iraq War II. Remember how I wrote in Enough Already about how Ahmed Chalabi sold the neoconservatives on a plan to rebuild the old British oil pipeline from Mosul and Kirkuk, Iraq to Haifa, Israel, if they would only get the United States to overthrow Saddam Hussein for him, and how they bought it because they are as dumb as they are corrupt? Well, Gary was there. As senior civilian consultant to the DoD and Iraqi oil ministry, he had a unique window and experience witnessing the Pentagon neocons and their machinations on behalf of Israel before and during that war. And it turns out that even though they did not get their pipeline, as Vogler demonstrates, the neocons and their Likudnik bosses figured out an effective plan B anyway. You are going to love Israel, winner of the 2003 Iraq Oil War by Gary Vogler, available everywhere. Check it out along with our other great books at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey, y'all, let me tell you about Robertson Roberts Brokerage, Inc. Nobody trusts the U.S. dollar anymore. Foreign governments are stocking up on gold instead of $100 bills. 1, they know they need to, and 2, that means you need to too. Interest rates are up, but for some reason, not much for savings accounts. Park your money there and watch Uncle Joe Biden just counterfeit its value away. You can see how the Fed is afraid to raise rates to beat inflation for fear of popping the current bubbles, at least before the election. So more inflation it will continue to be. Gold is your shield against monetary and price inflation, just like it always has been. Now, Tim Fry and the guys over at Robertson Roberts are recommending gold over silver since the world's almost 200 governments are putting their own pressure on the price, which should help everyone else who makes similar calls on their own. Of course, Robertson Roberts can help you with platinum, palladium, and silver, as well as gold. Don't let the Fed and the war party inflate all your savings away. Look up Robertson Roberts at rrbi.co. That's rrbi.co. And you sure are right about the absolute crop of NGOs over there. And, as I've been writing my book and studying about all the color-coded revolutions, it's the kind of thing where you might not notice in America just because America's so big and there's so many interest groups or something, but you take a little country like Georgia or Kyrgyzstan, and then you find out that there's like 1,000 foreign-funded NGOs in these countries. Like, this is a huge part of the economy. Maybe, I can't remember who I'm supposed to cite here or what I was reading about how, in Georgia, this is essentially the ticket to the upper middle class. Like, this is what you do if you're a professional, is you work for these NGOs. That's where the money is. Otherwise, it's a very poor country. So, you know, and especially for women who, you know, want to have a professional career, this is a place where there's an opening for them, as opposed to, I guess, other, you know, traditional careers there. And no, so it's huge.
The money comes from the U.S., you know, and even if you don't get a U.S. salary, I mean, I worked for an NGO in Hungary. I'm not going to say it necessarily, but it was foreign funded like this, and all of my colleagues there were the nomenclatura's offspring. So this is how the communists. This is the early '90s. Okay, so it's still a thing. We're now a generation or so past that, but at the time, this was the golden parachute for the children of the nomenclatura. And they were all in pro-democracy NGOs, right? And their parents were leaders in the Communist Party. You know, the grandparents were probably involved in Stalinist purges, you know. And so then when you switch gears and there's a new game in town, well, they're the heads of the pro-democracy NGOs, and they're still doing well. They still have like the first ones to have cell phones in the 90s, you know, nice cars, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, it's also a way to whitewash a lot of nasty things from the historical past.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I quote you actually in the book talking about how in, I guess it was Macedonia. I can't remember. There's so many of these things. There's one of them where you're going, you know, I don't even think that people in charge in America realize that they're supporting the communists right now against the people who had helped overthrow the communists in the fall of the Soviet Union just a couple of years ago.
Yeah, the people who were in the gulags and in the prisons.
Yeah,
they're the ones that suffered.
Yeah, they're the ones that get overthrown.
The Georgia thing we talked about, I think, before, but I mean, I think the freak out in Georgia and in Brussels over what was happening in Georgia, Brussels and D.C., I think that tells you everything you need to know about the importance of these NGOs in the broader democracy movement, i.e., do what we say movement. You know, because they absolutely freaked out if these weren't so important to the project of, you know, of opening another front against Russia through Georgia, then they would not have expended so much energy demonizing the Georgian government. Let's face it, Georgia is an important geostrategic position. However, as a country itself, it's not that important to U.S. foreign policy. It's not a major trading partner.
Right. And I mean, really, its importance is overstated anyway, because, I mean, what is the big deal is that we get to have our pipeline go west through to Turkey without going through Russia, and we get to block the Russians, kind of. The Russians can go around us, really, anyway. And then, like, worst case scenario, a complete Moscow sock puppet is in charge in Tbilisi, and they shut down the BTC pipeline, then so what, really? I mean, ever since the 1990s, they've been working so hard on setting this whole thing up. But ever since the 1990s, clearly, isn't it the case, Dan, that they've decided they're not going to put bases there. They're not going to try to militarize. I mean, they've sent trainers and whatever, but they don't have big American bases in the Caucasus because they've decided that it's not worth the provocation to Russia to do so. So in the end, aren't they admitting that they actually don't give a damn about Georgia at all? And that if the Russians come, then like, okay, that's tough.
Yeah, but I can see them having a massive, the pipelines, that's definitely one motivating factor. I don't think it's a sole one. I think it's I think there's the idea that if Georgia shifts back into, I mean, they've already peeled away Armenia. Right, you know, the West has. If Georgia slips back into Russia's orbit, and that doesn't mean they become a satellite, that doesn't even mean they become as close as Belarus is, but it means if they slip in that direction, which it looks like they are, although it's overstated. You know, the Georgia party is far less pro-Russia than it's being stated in the U.S. Nevertheless, if there's a sense that it's slipping out of our satellite, they can't handle that. I know this is a controversial opinion, and a lot of libertarians disagree with me strongly, but I do believe the U.S. support for Javier Milei in Argentina has a lot to do with making sure that BRICS doesn't take over Latin America. Now, that's the one Latin American outpost that will not join BRICS. And when people when the paper pushers in the State Department and in the deeper into the bowels of the U.S. government look around, they're desperate to make sure that BRICS doesn't dominate in Latin America. They're desperate to make sure that we don't lose a single anti-Russia outpost in the Caucasus in Europe. So they do think about these things. They do think about the chessboard,
Right. Yeah, that's true. And as far as Argentina goes, I don't know the details of the U.S. government's relationship with him specifically, but I do know that you have this Atlas network, which is different from the Atlas Society. I made that mistake before. But this Atlas network is essentially U.S. aid, right? It's Tom Palmer from Cato working with the State Department, U.S. aid and NED to essentially, I mean, hey, it's a great talking point. Man, it happens to be right. Less Marx, more Mises. The more socialist your government is and economy is, the worse it is. You should read some Mises and get it straight. Well, so the State Department got smart enough to steal our talking point and say that, yeah, you know what you need to do is get rid of the leftist who's geopolitically allied with these other nations that are our rivals, and you ought to put in the all other things being equal, the right winger who's going to be an ally of the United States and is going to do what the United States wants. And I trust you. I don't know the details, but I believe you if you're saying that that's all he represents really is AstroTurf, pretend Rothbardian, right?
I'm saying that he's not 1,000% phony. I don't know. He says some things that sound very good. But of course, they're going to have him say things that sound good. I think the most important thing, because I don't think the State Department gives a crap about Mises. Like, yeah, whatever. Let him say whatever. It doesn't mean anything. Right. The only thing that matters to us is we prevent BRICS from taking over Latin America, because that is the trajectory that it's on. Right. And so, yeah, so it's Atlas, but I would say even darker forces in the State Department are involved in that project.
Yeah. Well, and when they consider, and it is just, I guess, the case, right, basically that in Latin America, whoever's their rivals down there are the left. And so Mises is the patron saint of real capitalism, but that's the perfect avatar for them. They don't have to ever be genuine about it. You know what I mean? Yeah. In fact, the bigger the lie, the more they like it, apparently, to use, So, what are they going to do? Sell them on Revolution with Milton Friedman? You know what I mean?
Yeah, not very inspiring. But we heard it over and over. This or that foreign leader is going to be the next libertarian hero. Turns out to be a total flop, and a total tool of the State Department. And I don't think Maloney was presented as a libertarian hero, but certainly as a counter to the prevailing neoliberal view in Europe. And she's turned out to be absolutely the opposite. She's an absolute tool of the neoliberals. Ukraine. Okay, let's do funding. This is not an issue that we deal with, but at least her stated script was about the problems of immigration and refugees. Well, she backed down on that as well. So over and over again, they're being sold as this. I remember, I don't want to bore you with old stories, but I remember in Albania when the U.S. was trying to manage the revolution there, and Sali Berisha was running in '96 for his second term, and the U.S. put up a party against it. Sali Berisha was the real deal. I mean, like the real free market guy back then. It's a long time ago, but the party they put up against him, the U.S. backed against him, wasn't like a leftist party. No. They got a more extreme nationalist party, the Republican Party, to go against Berisha's Democratic Party, right? That's how they did. And it was the International Republican Institute that backed them through NED. The same happened in Belarus. It was the extreme right that the U.S. backed against Lukashenko back in the 2000s. So they always find this. They don't care about they care about the percentage of peeling away people. And so I think they'll take a libertarian, they'll take a right winger, they'll take a nationalist. They don't care.
Yeah. Well, and it is not necessarily the case in Europe the way it is in Latin America that whoever's outside of our orbit are leftists. That's how it's worked, but that's not necessarily the case. In other places overseas, they might take the leftist side against the right winger or whatever, depending on who's less independent.
It's hard to know who's who anymore anyway, especially when you look at European politics today.
Yeah. All right. So Oh, I know I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah, I want to ask you about this now. Tell us about what's going on with the changes in the conscription laws. I know this is something that's always been something that Dr. Paul follows very closely, and when he was in Congress would vociferously oppose anything that they would try to do to make it easier to conscript people. But that's going through now, huh?
Yeah, I mean, the notorious NDAA, it always has the worst stuff in it. Remember, it had indefinite detention of Americans back 15 years ago or so. And so what they slipped in this time was a provision whereby before conscription, I mean, signing up for selective service was quote unquote required, but it wasn't mandatory. You didn't get thrown in the slammer if you didn't do it when you turn 18, as a young man when you turn 18. And so what had happened is that so many people were just not doing it, apparently, that what they did this time is they put a provision in the NDAA as an amendment. And I'm forgetting who put it up. It was a real notorious scumbag who put it up. And it passed. Republicans and Democrats, they both voted for slavery. And so that makes it automatic. You are automatically registered for selective service, thus eligible for the draft when you turn 18. So there are a lot of bad things about that. The draft is awful. It's slavery, as the presumption is the government owns your body. But it also will grow government too, and that will, so as you know, the Leviathan will manifest in all other aspects of our lives as well. So it's an all around bad news, but it also reflects the desire of the neocons on the left and right to expand the war in Europe and elsewhere. And also the fact that more young Americans than ever. I just sent an article over to Dr. Paul for the show today, but we didn't end up taking it. But the deficit in males signing up to the military is like historic. Nobody wants to join the military anymore.
Yeah, and I saw a thing where, well, for fairness, they're really going to have to include women. There was an amendment that has been offered that they're going to conscript girls too. And I mean, I don't know if the implication is, they'll make them do all the kind of support work and send more men to the front in the next one, or if they're going to really be so equal opportunity about it and send people's 18 and 19-year-old daughters to go get blown up with landmines and artillery shells. But it kind of goes to probably more than anything the sort of video game unreality of American foreign policy to the people in charge of it, that they're not really thinking about what it would really be like to see a 18 or 19-year-old girl blown up with an artillery shell, or to have to take responsibility for that. They're just kind of off in their head about, well, it's got to be fair. We got to be progressive about it, or some kind of like pseudo principle or something, right? But they're not being realistic.
It was actually a progressive Democrat. I want to say Pennsylvania, somewhere like that. And she's the one that put it into the amendment saying, well, women should be included as well. Say, oh, yeah. And the girls, 18-year-old girls saying, gee, thanks, lady. Great idea. But anyway, I have the number in front of me. I just called it up as we were speaking. And as military.com reported that male enlistment in the U.S. military has dropped by 35% over the past decade. So
wow, that's great.
Yeah, it is great, but now they're going to try to nab them,
right?
And put them in on something, and and if you hell no, I won't go, then okay, well, we'll give you some other job. You can be a social worker, or God knows what. But the idea is that
the national service,
national service. You do whatever, but the idea that the state owns you is what's the most evil part of the draft.
Well, and especially even on the national service thing, but in the military too. That your first 2 or 4 years out of high school, you work for the government, right? It's not your chance to start your life. Now you got to work for the government and at best do nothing, doing the volunteer corps, make work, whatever. I forgot what they called it. Bovard wrote so much about this, the ridiculous, what do they call it again? The red shirt volunteer corps guys?
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
It just slips my mind,
Yeah, domestic waste of time corps.
Yeah,
or, you get blown up is way worse.
Yeah, and your first 2 years of paychecks comes from the government, right? So you automatically have this loyalty. Maybe it'll backfire.
Well, that's what I used to think in high school. It's like, man, they treat us all like this. Everyone's going to grow up to be as anti-government as me. But like, nope. It kind of didn't really work that way.
Yeah.
Some of us blow back, others not so much,
Yeah. I mean, it's such a preposterous idea that somehow you're going to need all of these bodies in the next war. I mean, the wars that they are ramping up against Russia and against China, I mean, what are they going to be? Is it going to be like the Poles when they entered World War II at first and they were riding over the plains on horses, because they thought it was still World War I? I mean, are you serious? We're going to have like a bunch of men marching into Russia? It's absurd. What are these guys thinking?
Yeah. Or even Iran. I mean, if they go to war with Iran, it's going to be an air war and a horrible one. But nobody thinks that they're going to do a D-Day and put in the army and Marines into Persia.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do that well against the Houthis.
Yeah, seriously. And we killed a few 100,000 people adjacent to them. But yeah, no, it didn't seem to do any difference. It didn't make any difference. Yeah. Do any good. Absolutely. That's what I meant to say. Strike that. Switch it. Anyway, yeah, I'll tell you. So, all right. Well, listen, I'll let you off the hook before we both start ranting about Israel, Palestine. But I just want to thank you for all the great work that you're doing over there at the Institute, Dan, and for your great show with Dr. Paul there as well.
Thanks so much, Scott. Thanks for all the great work you do. You're an inspiration.
That's very nice of you to say. All right. That is the great Dan McAdams. He's at ronpaulinstitute.org and ronpaullibertyreport.com. The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, apsradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.